Join me today as we take a look at an SRD that utilizes the unfortunately neglected D8. Hello everybody, and thank you all for joining us again here today on Haskins County for another TTRPG talk. This video series takes a look at tabletop roleplay games and related materials, makes suggestions for your own home games, and takes a look at all the various materials like this that you can use for game design and world building. Today we're going to be taking a look at EMERGE8. This was an SRD that was created by Titanomancy RPG. You might actually know about Titanomancy RPG because of their creation of the Caltrip Core SRD and the various things that kind of spiraled out from that. So again, kind of diving into the basics before we jump into more specific elements of this SRD. Again, it is built around utilizing the D8, specifically pools of D8, just like how Caltrip Core was built around pools of D4. Again, this was created by Titanomancy RPG. And another thing that kind of separates this from that sort of earlier Caltrip Core is that the original Caltrip Core didn't really have anything beyond like the dice pool mechanic. It didn't really have any sort of structure when it came to like character development or anything like that. This one has a bit more structure in that. Specifically, it actually has a type of composite character development that is actually not that dissimilar from my own Blossom system, where you have abilities that kind of build on top of each other. Inside of the actual SRD itself, which is actually quite short, it's only 24 pages, there are some other modular suggestions that include a sort of light chessboard style combat, the options for combo moves, which we'll explain a little bit later, and also ceiling rolls, which is basically a type of like control or concentration check or something along those lines. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the basics of the dice mechanics. Each character starts off with 8 skills. These are 8 skills that are defined by the creator of the game. So specifically what they might be would depend upon like whatever the primary thrust of your game is or the setting or stuff like that. Each of those skills is assigned a number of dots. In the base game that's recommended in the actual SRD, each one would start off with 1 dot, and then you get 8 more dots that you can distribute amongst them. But no skill can have more than 3. So at the start of a game, normally a skill is going to have somewhere between 1 and 3 dots. Whenever you are doing an action that would require using that skill, you would roll XD8, where X is the number of dots. So again, you'd be rolling anywhere between a pool of anywhere between 1 to 3 D8s. An important note here is that would be familiar for any of you who've ever played things like the 8 games from AEG, where you had that sort of roll/keep system of D10s. You do, whenever you roll the highest value on the dice, in this case a D8, it explodes basically. Titanomancy doesn't describe it as exploding, but that's essentially what it is, where basically you gain a success that counts as an 8, but then you get to roll the die again to see if you potentially get more. So it cascades. When you are rolling, you have to roll above a target number, and then that many successes determines how successful you are. Some dice pool mechanic systems, of course, do that by having the number of successes dictated by the difficulty, or they change the target number based on difficulty. In this case, EMERGE8 has the difficulty scale, which you can see here, where we have, things that are obviously things that you would need to roll better than a 1 for aren't even worth rolling, of course. So those are like these are things that are always going to be successful. And then we have a scale of 2, 4, 6, and 8. So with of course 2 being things that there is a small chance at least of failure, and 8 being things where of course it's almost impossible. And then, as you can see in the success scale, we have failure, success with consequence, complete success, and critical success. And of course, obviously, if you rolled more than 3 successes, that would be again, still critical success. But Again, as I mentioned at the start of the game, oftentimes your character, if you're using a skill, is only going to be rolling 3d8. So, of course, that means that you're not probably going to be getting critical successes very often, at least if you're using a skill. So, now, as I mentioned, in character creation, each character starts with 8 skills. These are assigned dots. However, just like in my Blossom system, where I have things in a background of a character and then they combine together to create skills. Here we have skills. We pair them together, and those create your character's abilities. Abilities will often have like certain special things or passives that are included sometimes, but also when you're using an ability, you actually roll the number of dice in your pool is equal to the number of dots in both of the skills that you use to make that ability. So, for example, if I have a skill that has 2 dots and a skill that has 1 dot, I combine them together and I roll 3 dice to whenever I use that ability. Or, 2 and 3 would be 5, and so on and so forth. Same thing with the ability. Whenever you're using a power, you would roll the number of dots from whichever 2 skills from each of the abilities that you want. Presumably the highest value ones. So again, if I have an ability over here that has a skill with 3 dots, an ability over here with a skill with 3 dots, then whenever I use my power, should I need to roll, I would be rolling 6 dice. Powers, of course, are more powerful than abilities. So whenever a person is creating a power, they would want to potentially add extra passives, extra abilities to that to make it even more able than an ability. Because, of course, you're not actually rolling that many more dice, or you might even be rolling the same number of dice for your abilities and powers. So that's one of the reasons why it'd be a bit different. Okay. One thing I should go ahead and add is whenever you're doing these pairings, you can only include a skill or an ability in one pair. So basically, since you're starting off with 8 skills, you have a maximum of 4 abilities, and therefore also a maximum of 2 powers. There is an optional rule where you can combine your 2 powers together and essentially create an ultimate. So in some ways, you might think of these tierings of abilities as being kind of like, some of the super powerful jutsus that they have like in Naruto or something. Where you learn this one element of ninjutsu, and that helps you learn the next level, and then that helps you learn the level after that, and so on and so forth. So then the next question kind of comes up is who makes the abilities, powers, and ultimates. Now, to be perfectly honest, if you as a game creator wanted to, you could go ahead and create a whole suite of abilities and powers to choose from. That the players have to choose from, instead of like giving them freedom to choose some of the specifics of what the abilities or powers might end up with. One thing it's important to note, though, is if you did create all of the possible combinations, is since you have 8 skills that you have to pair together, and you can only then you would probably end up with like 28 combinations for skills, and then for the abilities you'd have like for all 28 abilities that, again, you compare them together, you're going to end up with, I can't do that math in my head at the moment, but it's definitely like somewhere in the neighborhood of like 375. It's more than that, but I don't know. I don't remember exactly how much. But anyway, and then, of course, if you have that many powers that you're pairing together, you're going to have like an obscene number of ultimates. So that's just not possible, right? Instead, what I would probably recommend, and actually what Titanomancy essentially recommends, is basically you create a couple of abilities and powers that are suggestions. And then, you could have to try to give people an idea of like what sort of power scale each of these things could have, or like give them suggestions on like active abilities versus passive abilities, or some powers that might have a combination of those 2 things, maybe abilities or powers that give you extras things in certain situations, in addition to having a sort of less powerful like just standard mode. Things like that. That in order to give people like an idea of different ways that they could put these things together and different ways that they could give them an idea of the power levels, and then basically let the players build out whatever abilities or powers they want. Kind of similar to the way I approach the games that I've created that use the Blossom system, where the player is the person who's deciding what the trait or whatever it is going to end up being. That's definitely a good way to basically have the players create significant portions of the game at the table, or at least in between sessions. Instead of obviously relying on the game creator or the GM or whoever is running the game, having to do that either on the spot or ahead of time. So here's just an example of a character, kind of like a character class that Titanomancy had already created in the manual, just to give an example. So the eight words that you have listed there in the middle: bizarre, breath, form, go, moxie, put, turn, and work. Those are the 8 sort of base skills that Titanomancy kind of created to give a suggestion on, like, here's 8 things that could address a lot of different things. Then we have pairs that kind of go off of that. So, for example, bizarre and form combine together to create shapeshift. And then, just to continue moving on that right side, we have moxie and turn that combine together to create quicksilver tongue. So shapeshift, of course, allows the character to actually change their form. Quicksilver tongue obviously gives them an ability to be really good at convincing people, especially on the fly. And then those would combine together to create the power there, Eloquence Overdrive, that essentially makes them really, really good at trying to convince people of things, especially if, like, you're lying or you're trying to change a person's mind or stuff like that. The sort of combat that Titanomancy has created and put in here, that again is optional because it's sort of a bolt-on mechanic. It involves kind of like a sort of chess or even a JRPG style sort of combat where your characters are going to be moving and attacking each other on a grid. So like your character's class, like for example, that Quicksilver Revolutionary might be a class, or like a playbook, essentially. Or maybe even different types of NPCs might have different types of assigned a chess piece so that they have different types of movements, or have assigned attacks based on special abilities that they might have, or a weapon that they're using, or just the type of, if we're talking about a monster, maybe the monster has certain special things. So an example that I created that you can see here on the screen next to me would be like, if your dragon has, like we have a drake and has a breath weapon, then you could have, okay, the drake can use this on diagonal lines, and it damages everything in the force along that line for 4 squares. You could also have ranged attacks where you can hit any one thing along that line instead of the whole line. Or you could have like an area effect where basically like there's some sort of, like, let's say we have like a giant or something that has like a stomp or a slam attack, right? Or and like then that damages everything within like 1 or 2 squares of it. Or let's say, I don't know, we have an elephant, and the elephant has like basically like a trunk swing attack or something, that then ends up damaging maybe everything within like 1 square of like wherever its face is facing. So that would be like an area of like 3 squares, either on the diagonal or along the flat side if it's facing directly forward or to the side or whatever. And again, like I said, when it comes to the movements, let's say this piece moves like a rook, that piece moves like a bishop, that one moves like a knight. Maybe if you have a bunch of little minions, they move like pawns. Another thing that Titanomancy does suggest in the combat section is that whenever your character does a move, as in like an attack, then basically each success you roll would count as a damage. And then, of course, you would have like probably a health system where the number of and another option that you could potentially do would be is instead of having each success be a damage, is that you're just rolling for success, and then once you've rolled that success, then you add together all the dice. The dice that succeeded, and that is the amount of damage that you're doing. In which case, obviously, you're not going to want to have your dice have small numbers, your damage, your health have small numbers. You're going to want to have big numbers. But either way, whichever approach you have, normally your characters would have like health of like somewhere between like 1 and 8 when it comes to this sort of roll a success, do 1 damage thing. Or if you're doing the sort of add up the dice that succeeded, then presumably you'd want to have like a damage of like maybe a health of like, somewhere in the high 20s, low 30s, would probably be a pretty decent range considering the types of numbers we're dealing with. Some other optional rules that Titanomancy includes in EMERGE8 is a stamina or some sort of tracker in order to limit the use of abilities and powers. Basically, if your character is using a skill, then maybe that doesn't require the use of any tokens or whatever you decide to use to track this stamina. But then if you're using abilities and powers, basically have them have a cost. Partly to reflect just your character exerting themselves and stuff, but also another thing that they suggest, that Titanomancy suggests, not actually in EMERGE8, but in a companion to this that they created called Fantasy EMERGE8. In this system, the Titanomancy included again what they refer to as a stamina system, where your character uses up so much stamina, and then once its stamina is all used up, then that character basically is like knocked out for the scene. And then once the character's been knocked out of the scene a certain number of times over the course of like the campaign or something, then you have to decide whether or not your character is going to retire or die. So basically, it puts a hard cap on the amount of times that you can potentially utilize abilities and powers, making that an actually really valuable resource. Combo moves are basically a special type of ability or power that you could use that would combine together abilities and skills instead of from one player character, instead 2 player characters cooperating together. There are a couple of different ways that you could potentially play this. One would be to basically just, have it so that the 2 characters just have to be in the same place at the same time in order to use it. And just have it stand in as one of their abilities or powers. I would probably make it a little bit more powerful to kind of compensate for the fact that they can only really use it together, or maybe have it be like there's a powerful active thing that they can do when they're together, but then there's a less powerful sort of passive thing that's just always there all the time. So then the players don't feel like they're losing out on an ability or a power slot that they normally would have used for something else. The last thing that we mentioned towards the beginning of the video is ceiling rolls. So basically, these are times when your character would be rolling potentially a ceiling roll whenever you need to maintain control. So in this case, what you would do is you would potentially roll a pool, and then the player actually needs to roll under a difficulty number. Basically, like when you might want to use this, again, this would be a pretty decent stand-in for, like, let's say a concentration check in certain other games. But also, Titanomancy directly suggests that maybe this is something you need to use when you're trying to control a character, when character's trying to control their strength or hunger or stuff like that. So, basically, whenever there's some sort of urge or need that the character has that they have to maintain control over, or if the character is utilizing extreme powers that they might have difficulty maintaining active control over. So, for example, with ultimates, Titanomancy suggested that this would be a decent thing to do. Basically, every couple of rounds or whatever, the character has to roll and maintain control over the ultimate, or else it unleashes on them, or at least it scatters away on them. I also think that this would be a pretty decent thing to utilize whenever like your character is having to do super delicate work. Whenever key precision is important in a particular role, instead of making a role more difficult, you might actually combine a ceiling role and a lower difficulty role together, to basically say, okay, in order to actually be successful in this role, you have to roll in between X and Y. And anything that goes in between there is a success. But if you succeed too hard, then basically like, you're actually sort of like overwhelmed. So for example, let's say you need to convince somebody who's really shy and timid and stuff to do something for you. So then you have to roll in between X and Y. And if you get outside of that, to roll too high, you roll too low, then you don't succeed. I know this is not really changing the difficulty of the roll in the end, but in some ways I feel it gives the roll, it gives the actual mechanics happening at the table a feeling of there's an interesting feeling where it feels like you can actually succeed too hard, if that makes any sense. Another thing I could see you easily doing with this would be like simulating, a vampire controlling their hunger. So maybe this is like the hunger dice in, a Vampire the Masquerade, or at least, the tracking of hunger in Vampire the Masquerade. Or maybe if there's your character is like a spirit that's animating something, if your control gets too, if you roll a ceiling roll and you fail, then that adds points on a tracker, and then once your tracker goes up beyond a certain point, you just like lose control over the thing you're manipulating. So sort of think like Hollow Knight, if you take damage, you roll a ceiling roll. If you fail your ceiling roll, then you have to, then it marks points on a tracker, and then eventually you aren't able to control your suit anymore, or something like that. I don't know. Just an idea. So anyway, that was EMERGE8. This, again, was a SRD for creating TTRPGs. Created by Titanomancy RPG. As you can see, the little tagline that they attach to this is for TTRPGs you design as you play. Again, that kind of references that whole idea of, as you add abilities and powers, you creating them at the table, or at least creating them as you're going through a campaign in the game. So yeah, that was EMERGE8 by Titanomancy RPG. Links will be found down below in the description for this. I know for sure it's on itch. I'm gonna look around and see if it's on any other places, but there'll at least be that link there. It is on itch for, I think it's either just free or it's pay what you want. I don't remember. But anyway, yeah, that was EMERGE8 that utilizes pools of D8s. Thank you all for joining us again here today on Hassens County. Don't forget to rate your itch purchases, like, subscribe, all that jazz. If you want to find out about other videos that we create here, including videos on SRDs like this one. And have a good zone.